Hi, everybody. This is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today, we're talking with Raj Singh, VP of Product at Mozilla, which he joined through the acquisition of his startup, Pulse. Raj is multi-consumer focused startup founder, including Tempo AI, a smart calendar acquired by Salesforce, and All the Cooks, which became the largest recipe community on Android before its acquisition by CookPad. I'm super excited because I know many entrepreneurs dream of having a startup that they launch that ultimately gets acquired, and he's done it multiple times. So with that, welcome, Raj. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, Brett. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I got a ton of stuff I want to ask you and talk to you about, but can we start off with your personal story? Can you share with us your background and how you ultimately got started in your career?
Yeah, no. So I'm a computer engineer by trade. I grew up in the Bay Area. Um, Bay Area was very different in the '80s. I was born in '79, so mostly an '80s baby. Uh, the tech boom came fast. I was in high school during all of that in the dot-com era, and I just was always into computers. I mean, that was kind of the geeky thing to do or nerdy thing to do at the time. I would take apart my Apple IIe, take apart my 286, 386, put them together. Actually, my not my first job, which was at Subway, but my second or third job was as a computer technician. It was like a highly desired job at CompUSA and then later Fry's Electronics. And those are old staples of the Bay Area that I think are both now out of business, unfortunately, particularly Fry's, which was like kind of like the Costco of electronics at the time. Um, in any case, um, yeah, so I was in college, we're building, and I remember or just kind of learning software engineering wasn't like it was like a new thing, right? There was kind of this transition between computer science to software engineering. Software engineering wasn't really a major yet. Computer engineering was still very electrical engineering, and so it's like a very interesting transition period. And I remember reading an article about somebody who I went to school with, who was like a year older than me, about how he had started a company, right? And I was like, wow, that's cool. I'm like, I could do that, right? And so I remember getting some friends together, basically from my year, some of the smartest kids, and we spent some weekends just brainstorming ideas. We had narrowed a few things, and we effectively during our summer internships and or turned down our summer internship spent that summer of junior or senior year building this thing, and it was great. It was like a first learning experience. We ended up winning you don't know a lot as a college kid, and the internet wasn't so developed, and there's no resources, there's no incubators, no accelerators. You kind of had to figure everything out. And I remember were like our first strategy to try to figure out like how to get some money. Like it wasn't even a term like VC. All these things were like new terms, right? Was to go apply to the business plan competition. So we won the business plan competition, then we won the Central Coast business plan competition. And so this opened up networks and doors, and it was an incredible learning experience. And in the end, it was sold for peanuts, but it was like it was like kind of the start, like foundational start. And after that, I was an engineer by trade, but I remember I was working in New York for a startup, and it became very clear to me that I was not like the best engineer in the room, right? There was like always somebody better than me, right? And I was like, it's interesting. It's like, okay, I'm like the number two or number three person in this room. And I kept thinking, like, what am I like really good at? Like, what is my superpower where I can be the best person in the room, right? And it occurred to me, like, I just had a knack for like solving pain points. Like I'd see some product and I'd have a way to like simplify the user experience, figure out some kind of angle and build an experience that could take off. And so I ended up building a dating site at the time that took off. It was a college dating site before Friendster era. It was a great experience, and we grew that gangbusters. And since then I've really never looked back. And since then it's been pretty much all startups. In some ways, you could argue now that I take the easy path, which is building your own thing, which for many people is probably the hard path. But for me, I've built so many fractional resources and experts and network along the way that those things have now sort of become easy. And so I've built products in ranges of passion areas. I always focus on personal pain points. I'm a big believer that if it's a problem I'm experiencing, I know the problem deeply, and domain knowledge is a large part of sort of developing cognitive empathy and product success. And yeah, I've had a mix of bootstrap things I've worked on, venture back things I've worked on. I have a mix of failure, a mix of success. As you mentioned, most recently, it was acquired by Mozilla, previously by Salesforce and others. And so it's been neat. I've seen a lot. I've worked in all the roles. I'm a generalist by nature. I'm a builder. I'm definitely not an expert, but I think with this whole AI era, my time is now. Sorry, excuse
Bless
me.
you.
yeah,
No worries. Yeah,
yeah, no,
that's
yeah, go ahead.
amazing. I mean, in terms of background, and I'll tell you some funny side stories. So first off, my brother, 5 years older than me, was a big computer guy. Became a developer. He went to technical school to become a computer science major. And he had the Atari 400, Atari 800, took the stuff apart, was always developing, programming, stuff like that. I was more the tinkerer technically. He was more the developer, but nonetheless, we both sort of enjoyed the same kind of thing. I just didn't enjoy the coding as much. So he ended up going off into a career, um, becoming a developer. He went to Goldman Sachs and he was working there for years in their development. And now he's actually, it's funny because he took his turn at a variety of different sort of startups and fledgling companies. Unfortunately, despite the fact that some of them were great ideas, they didn't take off. So, what you've done, despite the fact that to you seems simple and commonplace, is actually it is really difficult. A lot of people try it and it just doesn't work. And once you have the prototype and the blueprint for making it work, especially obviously then the connections as well, that's great. But the amazing thing is he ended up transitioning back into technology and he just got his gold coat from Amazon. He's one of the handful of guys that finished all of the requirements for all the certifications that they offer. And that's just sort of how he is. But for me personally, when I graduated college, I decided I wanted to go into business. I was with one of my buddies. We went to a trade show and he said, I want to build a PC. I don't know anything about it. You know everything about computers. Will you come with me? Tell me what components to buy and help me build it. So I said, okay, what the heck? They used to bring these trade shows around to local high schools and all these vendors would come and they'd sell their stuff. And when I realized you could buy all these components for way cheaper than you could buy a PC from any of the big box companies, I said, there could be a business model here. So I actually started a business and grew it to 7 employees. We were multi-million dollar. We built custom configured PCs, shipped them around the country, and we advertised in the back of Computer Shopper, PC Magazine, all those old school magazines. And it was like pre-internet. So it was
Yeah,
really, really cool. But
it's like the Michael Dell
but
story.
yeah, yeah, exactly. A little less successful, but they beat me to it. They were ahead of me. Ultimately, what happened in that business is, they had a lot more, all the big guys had a lot more capital. So once they started to figure out just in time inventory, they were killing my margins and cutting those down. And because I didn't have the branding, there was no way anybody, why would you buy from me if you could get it at the same price? The benefit that I had is I could sell it for hundreds of dollars less. I could order my PC components on 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the East Coast from the West Coast, and they'd be on my doorstep in the morning. So when memory prices dropped, CPUs dropped, I could get real time inventory at those prices. Eventually, they figured it out too. They stopped with the massive warehousing, and it didn't ultimately have long shelf life for that. But regardless, really fascinating. So I'm curious when you set out to build stuff. I understand where you get your ideas from because you said you find those pain points. They're pain points you've had as well. Did you set out with the idea that, hey, I want to build something that's going to get acquired? Or is that just like the result of the success that you had?
So you never start with the plan to get acquired. Getting acquired is sort of is a failure mode, in my opinion. So I like to say um, sustainable categories have IPOs in the category. So like anytime you're building something new, the first step is you have some kind of pain point, right? And so like you kind of ask yourself like, okay, can I solve this pain point? And is this pain point playing along some macro trend that's swimming downstream? That's how I like to describe it. Like you don't want to be swimming against current trends. Like to say like, oh, I'm going to go build a tool for super long form writing in an era where everyone wants to consume short form stuff, right? That's upstream. That wouldn't be downstream, right? So then, yeah, and then I tell people you just start swimming in that direction. So I don't care what you're going to build because it doesn't matter because it's going to look completely different. And you're going to bet that your own product instincts are going to help you figure that out, right? So you're going to start building something, you're going to learn, iterate, go through, loops, whatnot, and you're going to I call this process Jello in motion. So little bits will fall off. It's going to harden, take shape, right? So it's going to hopefully land into something that's kind of working, right? So that's, I forgot your original question.
I was just asking if the intent was initially, do you
Oh, to get
build something
acquired.
to
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah. Right.
acquired? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I start, right? And my intent is to build a business, right? Like I want to build a business and survive. And I actually joke with people I can't get past first base. Like I've had a series of 8-digit exits, but need to get no home runs, no IPOs, right? But one of the things that's also interesting about that question is if you think about the venture capital industry. So they've got hundreds of billions, maybe trillion assets under management. The way they think about it is they see some new hot trend. Let's look at like COVID era. Everything was shut down. A whole bunch of startups emerged tackling the remote work productivity, remote work communication category. They don't know if one of these are going to break out or not. So from their perspective, what they do is they're like, we can take 1-2% of our total assets under management and invest it in this space. 1-2% might be, let's say, $500 million, right? It's not, it's like, it seems like a lot of money, but they're dealing with billions and billions, right? And for $500 million, their bet is one of these might just take off, right? And it'll be 100x. And if it doesn't, it's okay, right? Because they do this bet constantly over and over again. And the real tell is when you look at that category 5 years later, did anyone in that category get to IPO and survive? Or did everyone in the category fail? And that's very common in startup land where nobody survived in the category. Maybe because nothing really could become a business. Maybe they're all features. Maybe they got maybe the incumbents using whatever monopolistic skills they have and bundling and whatnot were able to sort of displace or who knows. But that's sort of what you look at. And so in my case, I never start with the goal of getting acquired, but in some instances I was steered in that direction. In some instances I was forced in that direction. In some instances I chose that direction. And that might be because of market conditions. It might be because I was tired. I tell people the number one reason that startups fail is not because of money. It's because the founders get tired, right? After 4 or 5 years of burning midnight oil, it gets exhausting, right? And so like I think it really depends. But I don't start there. But that's where I've landed. Now I will say, even getting an exit is as hard as you can imagine. There's a whole system and process on how I would approach that if you were trying to do that. But in many cases, it's better to be bought than sold.
Yeah, and I think that makes total sense. It's just always fascinating to hear from someone who's been there and seen it and done it, because I think a lot of people, go into things with the idea of, they have preconceived ideas of what they think the market wants or what they think is the right way to do things, but they don't necessarily really know what those answers are. So if an entrepreneur has an idea and they decide, okay, you know what, I want to launch something. I'm not worried about the end result, but I obviously want to launch something I think can be successful, right? So whatever that looks like to them, is there a paradigm or a method or a process that they should use to approach their idea and bringing it into reality?
There's so much criteria in how to evaluate an idea. And I'm sort of in the bucket now where I don't know what's going to work or what's not. Like there was a time I would be a little bit more judgmental. And now I'm kind of like, I've seen things that I had no expectation to take off and they took off. And I've seen things that I thought were slam dunks and they didn't work. Right. So who am I to judge? What I typically tell people is it's more about the process and it's more about relying on your ability to iterate and think and get feedback and execute and hustle and whatnot. And it's less so in some ways, even the idea, right? So you have some idea. The first sort of litmus test is at least, are you playing along some sort of macro trend? Two, are you going to be a user of this? Like whatever you're building, like, are you going to be a power user? Because I'm a big believer, if you're a power user, then you can certainly find 10 more, right? Like, is this something, but if not, can you find 10 people in your own network, people you trust or whatnot, that you could lean on to help you sort of test and iterate with? Do you have a process that you're kind of like building, getting feedback and kind of going through those like hundreds of little S curves that are involved? Have you thought about how you're going to do distribution and acquisition? Like, how do you get your customers? How do you make people aware? Like all that stuff is like much harder than building the product at this point, right? So I sort of feel these are all sort of various sort of litmus tests. But what I typically tell people is just build anything. Like you might be like, hey, I want to build a, something in the math space, like, math and education. I'm like, okay, great. Like go build a better calculator. Like, it's like, why would I build a better calculator? I'm like, just start swimming. And what's going to happen is you're going to iterate into something and you're going to end up in something totally different that might look like Wolfram Alpha. And next thing you know it, you're now a successful company. But there are so many factors that come into this. Luck, I have to say, is a significant chunk. And that's why I like to tell people, if you roll enough bowling balls, eventually you get a strike, because that is the game you're playing. And I say that because 86% of venture-backed startups don't return the money in, right? And so there's a lot of smart people doing these investments. They can't all be dumb, right? And so the thing is, there's a lot of other factors in play. First to market, the serendipitous person you met that created a whole distribution channel for you, the random partner. I mean, who knows, right? So, but this is where you have to lean on your own instinct, trust your own product gut, have some conviction, trust your ability to growth, hack, and hustle to kind of drive that growth.
I love two things that you said in there, and it's refreshing to hear somebody actually say it. One is, first of all, we all, to some degree, have to build the plane while we're flying. The reality that you're going to preconceive an idea, and like Da Vinci, you're going to wake up one morning and envision the helicopter, and then sketch it out, and it's going to work and fly, is laughable in most cases, right? Because by the time you get from where you started to where you end up, it's usually not anywhere close, and you couldn't have foreseen it. But it's through the very process of doing it that you make those distinctions, that you see those trends, and you make those adjustments. And I think the really valuable skill there is the acuity to recognize, okay, I'm onto something here. Okay, this thing that I thought was going to be the angle isn't really working, but we're getting traction over here, so let's move more in that direction. And I think being able to sort of steer the ship after it's taken off is a really, really valuable skill, because making those adjustments are the things that can either move you more towards success or away from it. And the other thing I love that you said is the element of luck, because I know we all want to pretend when we see any titan of industry that they were this prophetic person that had everything all laid out. But the reality of it is, it doesn't mean they wouldn't be successful in something else. It doesn't mean they wouldn't have discovered something else. But timing plays such a big role, and luck, as you mentioned, really does. As a micro example of this, so I was reading a story, and I don't know the guy individually, but he had developed this sort of method for working with all of these local sports teams and clubs. And he had this like event planning slash swag creation thing. And it was really good. And he built this great network, and he did all these various things that they were running events for all these companies. And he had left his job and he started it. And 6 months into it, COVID hit. His entire business got shut down because the whole thing was based on the ability to get all of these people together at these events and these venues. And it's like you could transition to virtual to some extent, but the whole crux of what he was doing was building the community by having people come together. So the timing just was terrible, but
I
it did happen.
yeah. I had this board member that once said, and I've said this quote before, but and it's a little bit of a cocky or arrogant statement, but it kind of sat on me. It was, we never make the wrong investment; we just make it at the wrong time. It just kind of goes to show it's all about timing. But yeah, I mean, luck comes in many forms. I think one of the things that's very challenging for a lot of people is, if most of your career you've been working in mid-sized or larger organizations, you typically have data. And so most decisions are data driven, and you have experts who can model and forecast and evaluate. And when you're building from scratch, you don't have a lot of data. You have some comps, but you have to basically, hand wave a lot of sort of assumptions. And that's very hard for a lot of people because it's very uncomfortable, right? You have to be comfortable with being wrong. You have to be comfortable with adapting and changing, which is also uncomfortable because some people like to have a plan and kind of execute against that plan and not see like lots of changes every week, right? And so, a lot of people, unfortunately, fortunately, and there's nothing wrong with this. They kind of dabble in this and they're like, what, this isn't for me, and that's totally fine, right? And there's a distinction, by the way, between that where it's done in earnest versus the true what I call drive-by entrepreneurs. There's also that as well. It's more like, it's like a resume thing for me, but like, I think it's totally fine. It's not for everyone, right? And that's why when I think of personas in the workplace, I think of archetypes. I think of there's operators who are working on mature products that are trying to squeeze out 0.1% more efficiency or reduce churn or whatnot, and then there's visionary craftspersons or whatnot, or playing kind of closer to 0 to 1. And so my career has mostly, almost entirely been 0 to 1. In some ways, I'm interested in learning what the other side is like, because I have not really played in kind of the 5.x to 15.x kind of range.
Yeah, it is. They're definitely different skill sets. There's no doubt about that. You can see it even in personality types as well. There are people, but yeah, I mean, to your point, I guess if you don't like discomfort and you don't like ambiguity, entrepreneurship's not for you. Because those are things you're going to have to deal with a lot unless you happen to be somebody that has, you come from generational wealth and this is just like a pet project. And if it doesn't work out, you've got a safety net. But if you're leaving your job and you need to provide for your family and you're going to try to do that with your own business, you got to be really comfortable with those other things because um, there aren't a lot of places to go if it doesn't work out. It can be the best thing in the world when it's going well, and it could be the worst curse in the world where you wish you just stayed at the corporate job when it isn't going well. And I know, talking to hundreds of entrepreneurs, I hear that story and that narrative play out again and again, no matter whether they're on the mountaintop right now or not. Everybody's had that point where they were in the valley and it was terrifying, right? They didn't know how they were going to pay their employees or pay themselves or do whatever they needed to do, pay their mortgage. And um, at the same time, obviously, if you've built something and you've done it with your own blood, sweat, tears, ingenuity, there's a great reward in that, just from knowing that you were able to do that. I mean, I think that that's amazing. So a lot of people start off as solopreneurs. How can somebody in that position grow their business if they don't have funding or they don't have a team behind them initially?
You know, um, so it's funny because the industry is almost turning on this topic. It used to be, I'm addressing this question specifically from the perspective of software. If we're talking about businesses in general, I mean, solopreneurship is off the charts. I mean, that's basically what I'm focused on at Mozilla right now, is enable the tools to enable service providers and therapists and coaches and tutors and whatnot to kind of grow their business. But we're talking about specifically software and tech. Historically, you needed you needed all these fractional experts. Like, you may not know a lot about design, or you may not know a lot about QA automation, or how to set up this sort of DevOps process or release engineering or whatever. Who knows, right? Go to market, whatever. ChatGPT and just AI in general has just become the democratizer, right? So they've basically brought all this fractional expertise in your pocket, and I think that's actually enabling what I've been calling the super IC. So basically, people who are like the super individual contributors, so people who can basically use AI to replace a lot of their low leverage work, so they can focus on higher leverage things like strategic decisions and the bigger sort of questions, and play more of a role of a conductor than having to sort of build everything by hand, which I think is a very fascinating thing. The second thing is, we're almost seeing this sort of pendulum swing back, where historically it's been, you need to go raise money as a validation point. It's like, oh, I raised money, I got third party validation. But now, there's a lot of trade offs when you raise money. You're on a treadmill. There's certain growth expected. There's updates. There's overhead. I mean, it's just administrative overhead, however you want to think about it. Now, some of those things are in place for good reason, and they're useful, right? It makes you think out of box. It makes you take a step out. But there is something to be said about controlling your own destiny, building it your own way, and not raising venture money. And we're seeing that a lot more now. It's almost a flex to say that you haven't. And so I think today, unlike previous times, it's easier than ever to build. And I think with things like with AI programming and whatnot, and I don't care if you're using Claude Code or whatever you're using, Codex, whatever, but like the fact that maybe 50, 80, 75% of your code can be built through AI is a remarkable unlock. And the fact that you can now use Figma Make or Lovable Bolt or whatever it is to explore some design concepts is an incredible unlock. And so I think we're just in a whole new territory now, and that's why we're just seeing the level of building at paces that we've never seen before.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it almost seems like the valuable skill set nowadays is who can use AI in a way that's most effective, because the biggest challenge, it's moving so fast, is to stay on top of what the capabilities are and how to best utilize it. I was just talking to a guy the other day who does a lot of stuff in the AI realm. And he said what he did is he did all those batteries tests, like Myers Briggs and all these other personality things and all that. He fed it all into his GPT, and then he basically said, listen, this is my business. This is what I do. This is what we do. What are the biggest mistakes that I'm likely to make based on all this behavioral information you've got about me and my history and my background? And what are the biggest opportunities that I might be able to unlock? And it was a fascinating way to use it, I thought, because he's actually having it analyze him as the founder of this business. And then he did the same thing with a book that he wrote. He said, okay, I have a manuscript. And if you looked at this manuscript, give me the five worst critical reviews I might get of it, and then give me the five most glowing. So he could be prepared and he could understand and see if there are weaknesses in what he was doing. And I thought that's such a fascinating way to use it because goes so far beyond, hey, give me an outline for this, or give me the 10 best versions of that, or whatever. And I thought, as these models evolve and as people get better and better at being able to use them, I think that that's sort of the arms race has become who could use AI and its power and harness it in a way where you could focus it in the things that are the most impactful for your business and what you're doing. And I find that element of it really, really fascinating. And some of the stuff it can do is mind blowing.
Yeah, I think I like to describe it as unlocking all this creative energy. So I think like there's like billions of people have all kinds of great ideas and they couldn't build it before, and now they can build it. And that's like the greatest unlock we've ever experienced.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I can't even believe just in the software space I'm in with affiliate marketing. There's sort of a big group of us, and we promote each other's stuff and we create things. And I can tell you, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, every single thing was manually created, right? And you had developers that might use a base code, they created something else. Now there's not a single tool in the affiliate space that we operate in that isn't like sort of rooted in AI. It's an AI that does this, an AI that does that. The entire thing has been flipped, like I mean, dramatically in just a really short period of time. And it's fascinating. I mean, the stuff that things can do. I mean, I built a software app that actually was like a predecessor to Canva in the sense that it was not as slick, but it would allow you to do graphic design, all these things. And the hook of it was it used AI, which was actually just a paradigm that I created for it, where you could select the items you wanted it to spin, and then you could click a button and it would replace those with other items from the library that we had all pre-created because there was no AI. And it would create multiple versions of your design. It would do all these things. And I mean, something like that, as cool as it was at its time, as soon as AI comes out, it's obsolete because you could do that with just by telling the machine what you wanted to do. So it's like, whoa, this is crazy. So, as product managers or product developers, right? We're all in that space in one way or another. What is it about decision making? Like, why do some people make better decisions? And what is the sort of lens to look at that through that enables people to be more successful than others at doing that?
This is a question I've actually have thought about, and I don't have a good answer. And the question I often frame to myself is I have worked with a lot of different product leaders and PMs, and there are PMs that consistently make better decisions. And the question is why? And at one point, I thought it was really about competencies. Like, so think about individual roles in an organization, whatever you work on, as a set of attributes, like a gaming character, right? Like, communication skills, cognitive empathy skills, creative execution, analytical sense, whatever it is, right? Like all the things that maybe comprise of let's say a great product manager. And I was like, oh, well, you could, spend more energy and literally level up in each of these different things. You could build more, gain more experience, but that wasn't necessarily an indicator of like better decision making. Like, so I don't have a good answer for you. What I have, the sort of approach I've taken, and the way, particularly in this AI world, I think it's so much about taste. because you have all this democratized knowledge. Now it's about evaluating: does that feel like a good answer? Does that feel like a good suggestion? Um, the best thing I landed at is exposure, right? So like running through repetitions, seeing the so-called case studies. But like the thing about case studies is I feel you make the same mistakes again and again, and you kind of have to live through it. And I think the other thing is what worked yesterday doesn't work today. So in many cases, like the case study hasn't been written yet, right? It's sort of like we can look at how they approach that market, but that doesn't mean that's going to work today, right? Because tech is just so dynamic. Things are changing on a daily, hourly basis at this point. So I don't have a good answer to that question, but it is definitely something I think about. And at least with my teams, I do spend energy to sort of say, like, let's level up. Like, let's level up on a particular focus area. Maybe it's understanding, product analytics. Let's spend the next 6 or 8 weeks and like go through exercises around that. Or let's spend 8 weeks and go through exercises around pricing, right? Or how we do market segmentation or whatever, who knows, right? And there's no right or wrong answer here, because there, as you said, or as you called out, there are people who get it more right than wrong. But unfortunately, in the moment, you never know, right? So the best you can do is be willing to adapt and react. And this is where I do think a lot of people fail, is they make a decision or they go down some path. And then now people think of sunk cost when they think about technical debt, but they don't think about sunk cost when it comes to product decisions. There is sunk cost there too, right? Because there's emotions involved and you don't want to be wrong. And it doesn't feel good to be wrong, right? But you have to accept that you are wrong, right? Because this game is about humility and getting to the right answer, right? That's the goal. So as long as you're in that mindset, but again, much easier said than done, because natural human emotions take over and nobody wants to feel wrong. And so they would rather double down on what's wrong than course correct.
Yeah, no doubt. I think the emotional side of it is one of the toughest things. I coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and one of the things that I see over and over again is when somebody is immersed in their own business, they sometimes have a real challenge in being able to step back and look at things analytically. Sometimes the answer is staring them right in the face, and it seems really obvious, and they can't see it because they're so emotionally tied to what they're doing. It makes it really difficult to make those objective decisions, which is one of the things about, I have to say, being a solopreneur myself for a lot of years, it's one of the things I think benefits you quite a bit from having a partner or at least a mastermind group where you could share information with other people that understand business. Your spouse and your family, they love you, they're going to tell you whatever, but if they don't know business, if they're not entrepreneurs themselves, if they're not running a business, it's different. If you have a group of people that you can rely on that will be honest with you and share that kind of information, it's invaluable, whether they happen to be employees or in the company or partners, or whether it's just external mastermind group. Because I can tell you from my own personal experience, I made mistakes through the years that I banged my head against the wall trying to figure out, and wasted months, if not years sometimes, trying to solve things or do things that somebody already had the answer to. If I had just reached out, if I had just connected more and built that network and relied on it, instead of feeling like, oh, the answer to every problem is roll up the sleeves and work a little bit harder, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache along the way as well, and a lot of struggle. And I think that it is true for a lot of people, that emotional connection, if it's your baby, if it's your product. But you have to remember, you're not creating it for yourself. You got to be creating it for your audience and for the market. Otherwise, you got a nice hobby, but you don't really have a business there.
I think, yeah, I mean, whether you're building it for yourself, whether you're building it for someone else, just this notion of sunk cost, it's a real thing. Like, engineers don't want to throw away code that they've already written. You see this in product decisions all the time. So for example, let's say you build a feature in a product and it's not being used, right? One camp will say, okay, we won't invest further energy, but they'll still maintain it. And there's a cost associated with that. And it may affect the overall messaging and positioning of the product, how the end customer understands and use your product, et cetera, right? And so there is such a thing as a negative roadmap, but you're not willing to go as far to say remove the feature, because it's like, oh, we already did all this work, right? Because it's a sunk cost, right? And so this is the thing, like, there's sunk costs both on the technical side, but in product decisions, and it happens all the time. And it's really hard because you're playing with emotions, right? And particularly in startups where you're playing with runway, people, steering a team is not easy, right? Like, at least with the startup, you're steering like a little motorboat. Like, a big company, you're steering a cruise ship, right? That's much harder to turn left and right, but you have to get people on board. You have to get consensus. So everybody wants to be a backseat driver when things aren't working. That's what I tell people. And so it's just a lot of overhead and stress for the CEO or for the founder.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So, all right. So, just getting back a little bit to the whole exit strategy, I just want to touch one more thing on this. Let's say that somebody was interested; they've got to a critical mass with what they're doing, and they said, you know what, I want to build this in a way where maybe I am getting tired. I put a lot into this. I've grown it to a certain point. What are the things that they should be focusing on if they have the idea or dream of being able to get it acquired or exited at some point, that aligns with what companies that would want to acquire it would be looking for? What should they be doing to prepare for that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the way I would approach this is, and this is counterintuitive, I call this sort of downside scenario planning, is basically on day one, think about who your 10 most likely buyers are. Not like 100, just your 10, because the reason is there's only so many you can manage. And, and as I said at the top of the discussion, it's much easier to be bought than sold, right? So we're playing through a scenario where you're trying to sell the company. And that by very definition is a much harder position to be in. So now the question is, once you've identified that top 10, counterintuitively, what you need to do is you need to actually reach out to those companies early on, not year 5, year 3 month, right? Year 6 month. And you need to begin the process of sharing what you're working on, not fearing that they could copy it, because big companies simply can't execute or are too slow. And usually whatever you're working on is not in their top 10 roadmap anyways. And doing that on a regular basis every year or 6 months. And the reason you're doing this is it takes 1 or 2 years to even figure out who's the right person, because the decision maker that has authority to even buy a company has to be pretty senior. And 2, the reason we want to socialize what we're working on a regular basis is for one very reason. The way acquisitions happen at larger companies is not on your timeline. Usually what happens, so the vast majority of acquisitions from larger companies are usually driven by the CEO. So the CEO drives 70, 80, 90% of the company. So you take the CEO of some Fortune 500 and they wake up one day and they're annoyed by somebody or some company, or they heard something at a party or whatever, and they're like, they go instruct corp dev, go buy this company. 10, 20% of the acquisitions in a company are actually done through some quantitative approach, like some departmental VP or SVP or whatever is like, hey, we need to grow here, blah, blah, blah. And the way that usually comes about is not because they wake up one day and they want to acquire. Usually they're at an offsite, some kind of leadership offsite, right, on a quarterly basis. And in one of those discussions, somebody around the table is like, we need to enter this space. And like, shoot, we're behind. We need to be in this space now, right? And so then they go to corp dev and they're like, who do we know? And the game as a startup is to be one of the companies they talk to. Not to necessarily be the one acquired, but to be one of the companies they talk to. If they don't talk to you and they acquire a company in your space that competes with you, that's a failure of you. That means they weren't aware that you exist. And so the reason we want to socialize on an annual basis or every 6 months or whatever with our top 10 competitors or who we think are the buyers is only so if such scenario arises at one of their offsites that you are top of mind and they go, hey, we need to find somebody. And oh, maybe also talk to this one. I've met them a few times. That's it. That's the whole, all that investment is just to be included in the list. Then at that point, it's still on you. Like you have to figure out like, are you the right fit? They're going to talk to a bunch of companies, et cetera, et cetera. But the vast majority of these companies don't do this pre-work. And so then what happens is they've got like 3 or 6 months of runway left. I'm like, I need to go find a buyer. And in that situation, you're in a terrible position because you're going to reach out to these companies and maybe it's a perfect fit, but it's not the right time because acquisitions are always about timing. And so it might be the right time in 12 months. It might have been the right time 12 months ago, but it's not the right time right now, right? And that the second issue, so as a result of that, you then basically have to lean on what I call spray and pray, which is a totally different approach, which is like, you don't reach out to the buyer, you reach out to corporate development departments, and corp dev then forwards your sort of pitch into the executive team to say, is anyone interested? And in that case, it's almost never strategic. It's probably just buying the team, right? It's a totally different thing. And that's just a totally different game, right? And so, my general opinion is you have to start early and start socializing.
Cool. That's a great approach. I mean, I think it is super important, and that connectivity, because look, at the end of the day, right? People do business with people that they know, and it's certainly the place that they start. And so, by being in that conversation, or at least being front of mind enough, at least gives you an opportunity to have a crack at it. So that's yeah, it's great advice. So AI has obviously changed the game in business, as we talked about a little bit already. How can we use it to accelerate growth? Are there things that we can do specifically as a business owner or a founder, other than just, okay, I can automate a few things? Are there things specific to growth that we can use it for?
So, AI has been an incredible unlock in my teams with respect to growth, right? So, when you think about growth, there's like performance-based marketing, paid acquisition, branding, spend. But there's a lot of things around organic, which is like getting discovered on Google search results, being mentioned by ChatGPT, and a lot of these tactics, there's strategies. There's sort of like programmatic content marketing, like basically a blog on steroids. There's being seen everywhere. So it's like commenting on Reddit threads, commenting on relevant LinkedIn threads. There's social media, right? Like, so actively creating short form content on TikTok, right? All of these are sort of different channels and different ways to drive growth. There's AI SDR, which is like cold email outreach against qualified leads. So I think like these kinds of activities have typically been tools that you would purchase and then some internal team running operations, right? Because there is a bunch of little A/B testing, executing the tools, just sort of doing the work. And a lot of that stuff now can be automated. And so I think for a lot of growth teams, we're seeing them use AI to effectively vibe code automation to do a lot of this stuff. And so they're able to scale a lot faster and just get more done. So to your point, just sort of AI and unlocking different workflows, it's been amazing. Now, the neat thing about these tools, this isn't production level code, right? This is not stuff I'm shipping to a customer. These are internal tools I'm using to help facilitate growth. These are internal tools I'm using to help get to reporting faster. These are internal tools I'm using to automate some email customer support workflows, right? Those things don't need to be at the same UI fidelity or QA fidelity that you might expect if you're shipping out to a customer. And so when you think about a lot of internal development, you're seeing tons of vibe coding and code generation being used. Now, certainly we're seeing it in production as well, and that's kind of a different workflow, but that's probably being done and managed more so by engineers than by sort of your forward deployed marketing engineer, right? Which is what you're hearing about now, right? Who's able to do this stuff, but they're actually in the marketing team, right? So I think it's really, really amazing how it's impacted growth.
Yeah, it is incredible. It's incredible all the different things that you can do nowadays. All right, so where can people find you, find your products, services, or connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm very active in tech. You can find me on Twitter or Threads or on LinkedIn. At Mozilla, I do have to shout out Mozilla. We are building a series of products for small business. So if you're a service provider, we have a website builder called Solo. We have a social media tool called Postful. We have a blogging tool called Carmen. So we have a range of different tools that we're building. Please do check it out. We are trying to democratize access to business for solopreneurs, the freelance economy, the side hustle, people want to be their own boss, etc. So pretty easy to find. Feel free to DM me. I'm always around.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that. All right, I have one last question I got to ask because I'm dying to know what your perspective is, and that's what's your number one tip for success as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
Hmm. God, the issue here is I have multiple answers.
You can share a couple if you want.
I think the first thing, one of the most common things I hear is like I have an idea, but I'm like waiting till I have my second kid or like I get this promotion or whatever before I start, and I'm like, there's never a good time. Like it's like you just gotta go. Like if it's burning, the time is now, right? The second thing is I see a lot of folks try, but not willing to. They kind of give up after the first failure. This is a game of perseverance, right? Like if you believe in yourself, you will figure it out, right? And I think that comes in a lot. And I think the third thing, and I have to be careful how I say this because I'm not suggesting people to like bet their home and don't do stupid things, but like there's not a lot to lose, right? When you're small, like I'll meet teams and they're building things and they're like worried about their brand perception and they're worried about like doing a particular activity because it might affect their. I'm like, dude, you have no users. Like, what's the risk here, right? Like, take more risk, right? Because the game in a startup is step functions. Linear growth is failure. That's what I always repeat to myself. And so we have to do better than linear growth.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thanks. All right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again, Raj, so much for sharing all your insights and great tips with us. You can visit Linktree/Mobile Raj for links to his background, product portfolio, and socials. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as always, remember, no matter what you want for your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.